We are back in Exodus at last. The real reason we were out of Exodus for a few weeks was because I wanted you to feel for yourself what it must have felt like for the Israelites to have all those twists and turns and detours on their way through the wilderness. No, kidding, of course, but I hope you'll find the last few weeks as we've been thinking about the law, that's valuable. I think you'll see why as we keep going in Exodus. And we are in Exodus chapter 19. And Israel is encamped at the foot of Mount Sinai. And if you remember, this is actually not a new location for us or for them. We've already been here. So is Moses. This is where Moses met God at the burning bush. It was at Mount Sinai. And in Exodus chapter 3, verse 12, God made a promise to Moses. He said, "This shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." So the Lord has kept his promise, and here they are at long last, and here we are at long last. Now, I want to open our time in Exodus here by reading a quote from the late theologian J.I. Packer. It's one of my favorite quotes of his, and I think it really captures the mood of Exodus 19. So here's Packer. "The Christian's instincts of trust and worship are stimulated very powerfully by knowledge of the greatness of God. But this is knowledge which Christians today largely lack. And that is one reason why our faith is so feeble and our worship is so flabby. We are modern men, and modern men, though they cherish great thoughts of man, have as a rule small thoughts of God. When the man in the church, let alone the man in the street, uses the word God, the thought in his mind is rarely of divine majesty. A recent book was called Your God is Too Small. It was a timely title. We are poles apart from our evangelical forefathers at this point, even when we confess our faith in their words. When you start reading Luther or Edwards or Whitefield, though your doctrine may be theirs, you soon find yourself wondering whether you have any acquaintance at all with the mighty God whom they knew so intimately. Today, vast stress is laid on the thought that God is personal, but this truth is so stated as to leave the impression that God is a person of the same sort as we are, weak, inadequate, ineffective, a little pathetic. But this is not the God of the Bible. Our personal life is a finite thing. It is limited in every direction, in space, in time, in knowledge, in power. But God is not so limited. He is eternal, infinite, and almighty. He has us in his hands, but we never have him in ours. Like us, he is personal, but unlike us, he is great. In all its constant stress on the reality of God's personal concern for his people, and on the gentleness, tenderness, sympathy, patience, and yearning compassion that he shows toward them, the Bible never lets us lose sight of his majesty and his unlimited dominion over all his creatures. This is where most of us go astray. Our thoughts of God are not great enough. We fail to reckon with the reality of his limitless wisdom and power. Because we ourselves are limited and weak, we imagine that at some points God is too, and find it hard to believe that he is not. We think of God as too much like what we are. Put this mistake right, says God. Learn to acknowledge the full majesty of your incomparable God and Savior. So with that, let's read Exodus 19, verse 1. In the 3rd month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." So Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which the Lord commanded him. Then all the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. Well, as I was studying this chapter this week, you got to believe me when I say I have read this chapter before. This wasn't the first time I read it. And yet something that was striking to me is how many times Moses goes up to the Lord. Maybe it's just me, but I just haven't paid very close attention to this before. All told, Moses is going to go up to the Lord on Mount Sinai something like 7 times in total. In my head, he goes up one time, gets the commandments, comes back down, sees everybody worshiping the golden calf. He breaks the stone tablets and has to go back up to get new ones. So 2 times. That's my understanding of the sequence of events. And like I say, I've read this plenty of times before, but it is so easy for your eyes to just glaze over when you're reading the Bible. So just here in this chapter, chapter 19, we will see Moses go up 3 times, which is amazing in and of itself. We haven't even gotten the 10 Commandments yet, and he's already gone up and down 3 times. Now, on his first ascent up the hill, you can see this is pretty formal. God has a word for his people, and it's kind of like you're reading the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. I mean, it just feels like everything that comes after this is going to be really important. Well, in verses 3 and 4, God reminds his people of everything he's done for them. Now, it's only been 3 months since they left Egypt, not really that long. And so you would think that they don't need to be reminded that they're not slaves anymore, making bricks without straw. It doesn't seem like they should need to be reminded how God brought them through the Red Sea, how he crushed the Egyptians through all those plagues. I mean, did they sleep through that? That's pretty memorable. Well, unfortunately, we have seen that the Israelites have definitely and frequently forgotten who God is and all that he's done for them. Of course, the secret is we do the same thing, don't we? And so God reminds them, and he also reminds us. But then the other reason I think God's bringing this up and reminding them is that his salvation of the Israelites is the reason that he's going to demand their obedience. And just listen to this language. He says, I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. You know, the critique of the Lord of the Rings, the movie, or the book a lot of times, is why didn't Gandalf just send Frodo to Mordor on the eagles to begin with? It saved a lot of time. Well, that's what the Lord did, as we see right here. He bore them on eagle's wings the whole time. They just stood by as God fought for them and defeated their enemies and just accomplished the whole thing. And so now I brought you on eagle's wings. I bore you on eagle's wings. I've saved you completely. Now God calls for their obedience as a response. And that's really how it is for us as Christians. God saves us completely, totally, and our response to that salvation is just grateful obedience. So that's what we were talking about with the third use of the law, that we no longer have to obey God's law in a covenantal way in order to earn eternal life, but we want to obey the law now. God's law tells us how we should live if we want to please God, and we do want to please God. He's done a lot more for us than just part the Red Sea. He sent his Son to take on all of our guilt and condemnation and rescue us from hell. And so God saves us, and we respond with grateful obedience. There's similarities there. But there is a key difference between us in the new covenant and these guys here in Exodus 19. Look at verse 15. I think I'm wrong about that. That's not the right verse. Verse 5. Look at verse 5. So God says, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. This is what you call a conditional statement. If this, then that. You only get this if you do that. So God says, you'll be a special treasure to me above all other peoples. The whole earth is mine, he says. In other words, all the nations are mine, but you will be mine in a special way. So in the same way that you might own everything in your house, but some of those possessions are much more special to you, well, Israel is going to be the crown jewel for God, his prized possession, the apple of his eye, if they keep his covenant. Now, it's important to say that Israel is already in a covenant with God. It's called the Abrahamic covenant. God made a covenant with Abraham a long time before, and he said he's going to bless him and make a great nation out of him. And God promised him the land of Canaan, promised that to Abraham's descendants. That was Genesis 12. And that covenant was kind of like the Declaration of Independence. From that moment on, Abraham and his children were a nation, officially. The Israelites are his descendants, and they are going to the promised land because they believe that God has made a covenant with them to give them this land. And so once we get to Exodus 19, we can see this moment as a sort of covenant renewal ceremony. They're renewing their wedding vows, if you will. And this right here is what will be called the Mosaic covenant, the covenant with Moses. So there's the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. But then when you read in the New Testament, they sort of get lumped together and they're just called the Old Covenant. So as Christians, are we in a covenant with God? Yes, we are. Are we in the Old Covenant or the New Covenant? We're in the New Covenant. And Hebrews 8, verse 6 says that Jesus is mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises. Well, that better covenant with better promises is the New Covenant, the one we're in, and here's why it's better. The promises of the New Covenant aren't conditional. Or they were conditional, but Jesus Christ perfectly fulfilled those conditions for us. He perfectly obeyed God's law. He perfectly kept God's covenant. But as you can see, under the terms of the Old Covenant, the burden is on God's people to fulfill the terms of obedience. If you want to be God's special treasure, well, you've got to obey God's law fully and completely. You've got to keep that covenant. Now, if you skip down to verses 7 and 8, Moses comes back down the mountain and he tells the people everything that God has said to him, the stuff that we just read, and check out their response in verse 8. Then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. All right, so here's a covenant. It involves two parties. There's God and his people. And the condition is obey God fully and keep his covenant. And the people respond, okay, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Now that's good, right? I mean, that's exactly what we want to say to the Lord, that we will obey him completely. We're not going to skimp. We're not going to cut corners. But the problem is, are the Israelites going to keep the promise that they're making here? No, absolutely not. All that the Lord has spoken we will do? No. We don't even see anything close to that in the history of Israel. Ultimately, just as Adam failed to keep God's covenant and they were cast out of the garden, the Israelites will also fail to keep God's covenant and they will be cast out of the promised land. And we'll say a little bit more on that later. But look at verse 6. God says to the people of Israel that they shall be to him a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, this is amazing language. In fact, it's the only time that this appears in the Old Testament, although we do see the language again in the New. But a kingdom of priests. In other words, this whole nation, all of these citizens will be holy as priests. They'll be set apart unto God. They'll be priests, at least in the sense that all of them will know God in a personal way. To be a priest is to have access to God. And so just listen to the goodness of God here. He's going to make them his special treasure above all the other peoples of the earth. He's going to make them a kingdom of priests so that all these people can know him and have access to him. That wasn't something that any other nation had with their gods. And after all the ways that they've been rebellious that we've seen on the journey through the wilderness, boy, God is just doubling down. He is digging in his heels. He is determined to be good to them. And at least for the moment, God's people are responding in kind. They're hearing what God is saying, and they're game. They want to be his special treasure. They want what God is offering, and so they commit themselves to him. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And so, if you will, they've got a contract sitting in front of them, and they all corporately sign their names along the bottom line. And the Mosaic covenant is now officially ratified. It's in effect. But we're not done yet. Moses has only been up the mountain one time. So let's read verse 9. And the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever." So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, 'Take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether man or beast, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain.' So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, 'Be ready for the third day. Do not come near your wives.'" Well, this just got a lot more intense. And it's a lot more intense than even the last time that God spoke to Moses here, right? Last time it was a burning bush. Moses had to take off his sandals because it was holy ground where God was. Well, now God is appearing as a thick cloud, and we're going to see this cloud described as thick darkness. So this isn't just the pillar of cloud that they were used to. Honestly, it's something a lot more frightening. It isn't natural, and everyone can see that. And God says the purpose of it is it's going to serve to authenticate Moses as someone who can speak for God. And the language for that is mediator. Moses is the mediator between God and man. He's the go-between. We're seeing God speak to Moses, and then Moses speaks to the people, and then vice versa back the other direction. And now, verse 10, as the mediator, Moses' orders from God are to consecrate the people. God says he's going to come down in the sight of everybody. They're going to meet with God. They're a kingdom of priests, right? They're going to have access to him. But it's not automatic access. It's not casual access. Moses has to consecrate the people, which means to set them apart, to make them holy. In their current state, they are not fit to meet with God. And really, that's putting it mildly. It's not just like inappropriate for them to come into God's presence. No, it isn't safe. It's dangerous. God is holy, 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 and we've seen that the Israelites are sinful, sinful, sinful. If they are to just waltz into God's presence, they will not survive. So God sets a time when he's going to appear in glory. It's the third day. I wonder what else happens on the third day. I don't know. Nothing of significance, I'm sure. Anyway, God's going to come down on the third day, and so they've got to prepare themselves for that. So they've got some instructions. They're instructed to wash their clothes, verse 14. And then Moses also, it just says sanctifies them. It probably means that he made a sacrifice for them on their behalf. And the other thing in verse 15 is they aren't allowed to even have relations with their spouses. Well, that's not a sinful thing, but God is looking for their complete focus. He wants all their attention as they're preparing to meet with him. Same thing with the clothing, right? Having dirty clothes isn't a sin, but washing their clothes is symbolic of their own need to be pure and cleansed coming into God's presence. All that to say, they need to be ready for the third day when it happens. But in the meantime, God tells Moses, if you notice, to set up these boundary markers around the mountain. And if anybody goes up the mountain, they cross the boundary, if they even touch the base of the mountain, it says he shall surely be put to death. It says stoned, he shall be stoned, or shot with an arrow. And look at this, whether it's man or beast. So not even your dog can get close to God. So the Israelites, they have orders to shoot on sight anyone who tries to approach God on their own initiative. Anyone who tries to approach God not in the way that he has decided. Verse 13 is clear. They have to wait for the trumpet to sound before they can cross over and meet with God. That's what they're waiting for. Those are the instructions. Pastor Phil Ryken said that we live in an age that sees God more as a personal friend than a supreme deity. Most Christians today feel more comfortable with a user-friendly God than with one who is holy and majestic. The result is a casual approach to worship. I refer not to the style of worship primarily, but to the attitude of most worshipers. We come to church the way we would drop by someone's living room rather than the way we would enter the throne room of a king. I think he's right about that. I think we've lost something as worshipers coming to church. But I'll tell you what, I guarantee you that is not how the Israelites were feeling. They were feeling anything but casual, anything but comfortable. They're being confronted with the holiness of God, the alien otherness of God, and it was terrifying. So they're waiting for the third day. Let's read verse 16. We'll take it to the end. Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. Also let the priests who come near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." But Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds around the mountain and consecrate it.'" Then the Lord said to him, "Away, get down and then come up, you and Aaron with you, but do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them." So Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. All right, so the trumpet has sounded, and Moses now leads the people up to the foot of the mountain so that they can meet with God. But if it's possible, the scene has gotten even more frightening. So now, in addition to that thick cloud of darkness, there's now thunder and lightning, a lot more than we got yesterday, I think. Mount Sinai is covered in smoke because God descended upon it in fire. So this whole place is just smoking up to heaven. There's an earthquake. Can you just try to imagine this? Like what this must have looked like. And it says all the people are trembling. I mean, this was scary. Now, here's the deal. The trumpet has sounded. The people have been moved forward to meet with God. It's the third day. But God isn't quite ready to reveal himself. He calls up Moses in verse 20. He says to him in verse 21 to go back down again. So that's now his third time up. And now he's going to go back down again and warn the people not to break through the boundaries, to gaze at the Lord, lest they die. And he says, verse 22, you need to have the priests consecrate themselves too, lest the Lord break out against them. So they're right there on the precipice, these Israelites. They're about to meet with God, and Moses gets called up again. He's probably feeling a little impatient now, like, okay, what are we waiting for? Let's just do this. And God says, go back down again and warn them again not to break through the boundaries to look at me. Well, Moses pushes back. Verse 23, he says to the Lord, well, the people, they can't come up to Mount Sinai. I've already given them your warning about the boundaries. In other words, he's saying, I already warned them once. They don't need another warning. But God disagrees. Verse 24, he tells him to get down there away. Did you notice that? Get down there, warn them again. God knows better about us. He knows our hearts. Despite the fact that the Israelites were seeing God in this terrifying way, well, they weren't scared enough. God knows that they were still going to be tempted to break through, to come to God on their own terms and on their own timing. They still had the presumption to just stroll into God's presence and look upon his perfection. They thought they could just do that whenever they wanted. And that's how this chapter ends. It's honestly amazing. Like the very next verse now is the Ten Commandments. It just goes right ahead. So Moses goes down the mountain, and now God starts speaking. Moses is just a spectator along with everybody else, and God's voice is thundering out to everyone. He's preaching his law here, Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments. And then when he's done, I want you to look down at Exodus 20, verse 18. Exodus 20, verse 18. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, you speak with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. Can you imagine that? Please don't let God speak. It was so terrifying that they couldn't even listen to him, let alone look at him. I just think we have far too low a view of God. We don't realize that if we actually encountered God, it wouldn't be fun and cozy. It would be terrifying. Not because he's mean or that he's going to try to harm us, but he is so high above us and so ferociously holy, and we are so unbelievably sinful that, well, overwhelming is just too weak a word to describe it. We would be like the Israelites, just begging for God to stop talking because it's too frightening. Well, there you go. There's Exodus 19. So what do we do with this chapter? We've got a bit of a quandary here in that God is saying he wants to be their God. He wants them to be a kingdom of priests, which means that they'll have access to him. But as we can see, it's a little tricky trying to get access to this God. Listen to these words from Isaiah 33. Isaiah gets it. We just read this a little bit ago. He says, the sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness has seized the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? He who walks righteously and speaks uprightly. He who despises the gain of oppressions, who gestures with his hands, refusing bribes, who stops his ears from hearing of bloodshed and shuts his eyes from seeing evil, he will dwell on high. That's the fundamental question that all of us have to ask ourselves. Who among us can dwell with the devouring fire, with everlasting burnings? I know that Isaiah has Mount Sinai in mind here as he's saying all this. The smoke, the fire, the lightning and thunder, the earthquakes, it's all meant to get you to feel, not just to know, because we know it, but to get you to feel the intense holiness of God. And in light of your sin, how can you dwell with that? Well, Isaiah answers. It's he who walks righteously and speaks uprightly. That's the guy who can dwell with everlasting burnings. But no one in Israel qualifies for that. Not even Moses. Remember, we're going to see this later. Moses can't even enter the promised land because of his sin, his disobedience. And all these people, they're consecrated. They've had their clothes washed, but they still can't cross the bounds. In the book of Hebrews, the author takes this scene at the foot of Mount Sinai, and he tells us that this is not what we experience as New Covenant Christians. So let me read Hebrews 12:18-24. For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire, and to blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. For they could not endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. We've been talking about the law and the gospel here in church, and this is a prime example that the law is not the same thing as the gospel. The law condemns, the gospel forgives, and you see that distinction all over the Bible. It's put into different words. We saw it in John 1:17. The law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Or here, we've got it in Hebrews 12. There's Mount Sinai, and there's Mount Zion. There's the earthly Jerusalem, and there's the heavenly Jerusalem. There's Moses, the mediator of the old covenant, and there's Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. Under the old covenant, under the law, the sight of God was terrifying. Not because he's ugly, but because you are. We are so ugly in our sin that we can't stand in the presence of unstained beauty. We are imprisoned under the conditional terms of the old covenant. If you obey, then you'll be my special treasure. But we have not come to Mount Sinai in the new covenant. Through Christ, we have arrived at the foot of Mount Zion, that heavenly Jerusalem. And why is that true of us? Well, because we have a better covenant with better promises given to us by a better mediator. John Calvin puts it well. He says, what was entrusted to Moses is separate and distinct from the gospel, because God, who appeared in the law as an avenger, now, with fatherly kindness, gently invites us unto salvation and soothes our troubled minds by offering us the forgiveness of our sins. So that covenant with Moses was a covenant of works. Fulfill the terms, and you will receive the blessings of the covenant. Well, they couldn't do that. The new covenant, though, is a covenant of grace. Although it needs to be said that the new covenant was a covenant of works for Jesus, right? He had to obey the law fully and completely, perfectly, perpetually, personally, and that's exactly what he did. He is the man of Isaiah 33. He walked righteously and spoke uprightly, and he was able to ascend the hill of the Lord, to enter God's presence on his own merits. But the beautiful thing is when Jesus does that, he ascends that hill, well, he takes us with him because we're united to him by faith. We're his bride. And how could he not take his bride with him wherever he goes? So now, through Christ, we have full, privileged, non-fearful access to God. We're welcomed with open arms. And I love 1 Peter 2. 1 Peter uses the exact same language of Exodus 19, but it applies it to us. So here's 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10. It says, but you are a chosen generation, listen, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Notice it doesn't say, if you obey, then you'll be my special people. It just says, through Christ, you're my special people. You're my royal priesthood. You're my holy nation. And so now in Christ, we are God's special treasure. We are truly a holy nation. We are a royal priesthood, a kingdom of priests where we all have access to God. So the writer to the Hebrews, he's saying it exactly right. He's saying, hey, have you read Exodus 19? Man, what a scary chapter. Well, I want you to know that if you're in the new covenant, you have not come to that mountain. You're in a different situation. You have come to a different mountain. And another writer today, he puts it like this. It says, the contrast is absolute. It is the contrast between the law and the gospel, between Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. One mountain was dark and stormy. The other is a city of bright and shining joy. One mountain was a place of fear and danger. The other is a place of peace and safety. On one mountain, the angels blazed with fire and blasted with noise. On the other, they form a welcoming party for a celebration. One mountain was designed to keep people away. The other was designed to draw them close. Now, here's what we need to say. This is not a different God. There is not an Old Testament God and a New Testament God. The same God who spoke in thunder and smoke and fire from Mount Sinai is the same God who wrapped himself in human flesh and ascended another mountain to preach his law. We call that the Sermon on the Mount. What the Israelites saw on Mount Sinai is nothing less than the glory of Jesus Christ. I think it's really interesting. This isn't the Sermon on the Mount, it's another mountain. When Jesus was transfigured in Matthew 17, it says first that he went up on a high mountain, and then it says that his face shone like the sun, and while he was speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And then the disciples fall on their faces and they're afraid. It sounds like Mount Sinai to me. It's the same God. He hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is that he's made a way to grant us access. The sign at the foot of Mount Sinai, it said authorized personnel only, and we just frankly aren't authorized. But Jesus is. Another writer, he said it greatly. He said, the difference now is that we're on the right side of God's justice. They weren't then. We are now. Jesus has atoned for our sin. And listen, every single sin you have ever and will ever commit, it is washed away. And, your clothes, they're not just washed. You're given new clothes. You're clothed in the righteousness of Christ. Moses, as a mediator, he couldn't do that. He was a sinner himself. But our better mediator, Jesus Christ, his sacrifice makes us perfect. It qualifies us to enter God's presence. It makes us authorized. And so Hebrews 4:16 can say, let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. The Israelites absolutely could not come boldly to God's throne, but we can. Now, does this mean that we now waltz, stroll, saunter into God's presence as New Covenant Christians? Does this now make worship casual? The answer is no. Yes, we come boldly to the throne of grace, but we are doing so because the Son of God died a gruesome death to secure it. So we come boldly, yes, because his sacrifice was great enough to rip open the curtain, but we must also come with trembling, realizing the great price that was paid for us to do this. Bold does not mean casual. Man, every Sunday, every Lord's Day, we are approaching God to worship him. Can you just stop and think about that for a second? When we read Exodus 19, we should realize what an absolutely astonishing privilege that this is. Do you realize we are doing right now what they could not do? The Lord Jesus promises in his word that when we gather together in his name, under his authority, that he is present with us. Right this minute, Christ's special presence is with us. He's present in our singing and our praying. He's present in the Lord's Supper. He's present in the preaching of the word. This is anything but casual. It's joyful. It's meaningful. It's delightful. It's encouraging. It's full of gospel grace and hope. But it's not casual. What we're doing here should feel weighty. And I think too many Christians treat Sunday mornings as something less than that. God is meeting us here in power through his word and by his Spirit through these ordinary means. He's commanded us to sing and pray and have the Lord's Supper and preach the word, and he's promised to bless those things to our nourishment as his people. We have not come to Mount Sinai. Praise God. This is not a fearful and terrifying experience, hopefully. We have come to Mount Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem, which means that this is a taste of heaven. That final assembly of the saints gathered together to worship. We read about that in the Bible. This is as close to God and as close to heaven as we get here on earth. And it's amazing because in some ways this is just so ordinary, right? There's no lightning or smoke, although we could get a smoke machine, I guess. Other churches like to do that. But I want you to read Exodus 19 and feel the immense privilege that we have in the new covenant to approach God. Yeah, certainly we can do that as individuals in private. You can have communion with God as you spend time in prayer and read the Bible, definitely. But there is something unique and special as we gather together on the Lord's Day. Christ doesn't promise his special presence anywhere else. I'm not special, Andy's not special, neither's Jordan, but Jesus is. And he's here with us. We're doing what the Israelites could not do. We are crossing the boundary markers to meet with God and hear from his word, hear him speak. This is nothing short of momentous. Are you trembling? Do you feel the weight of what we're doing here? This is an unparalleled blessing that we have to gather together at the foot of Mount Zion in the presence of Christ to worship him. So let's take communion together. If you're helping serve, why don't you come forward?